A mysterious guitarist walked onto Jimmy Cliff's stage and challenged him to a guitar battle. When the crowd realized who it was, the entire music industry changed forever. It was July 25, 1965, at the Newport Folk Festival in Rhode Island, the most prestigious folk music gathering in America, where careers were made and musical movements were born. Jimmy Cliff had been invited as a special international guest, representing the emerging Caribbean music scene that was beginning to capture attention in American folk circles. The festival organizers wanted to showcase how protest music and social consciousness were developing in different cultures around the world. The crowd of 17,000 folk music purists had come to Newport expecting traditional performances from established artists like Joan Baez, Pete Seeger, and other icons of the American folk movement. They weren't prepared for reggae music, and many weren't sure what to expect from this young Jamaican performer who had been generating buzz in European music circles. Jimmy was scheduled to perform during the evening's International Voices segment, a new addition to Newport designed to demonstrate that protest music and social consciousness were universal languages that transcended cultural boundaries. But what happened that night would prove that music itself could transcend not just boundaries, but entire genre definitions. As Jimmy took the stage with his acoustic guitar, he could feel the curious but skeptical energy from an audience that had never heard reggae music performed live. These were serious folk music enthusiasts who prided themselves on understanding authentic protest music, but they had no framework for interpreting the spiritual and political messages that Jimmy carried through Caribbean rhythms. Jimmy opened his set with Many Rivers to Cross, performed in a more acoustic folk style to connect with Newport's traditional audience while still maintaining the spiritual depth that made his music powerful. The response was polite but uncertain. People were listening respectfully but weren't sure how to respond to this fusion of folk storytelling with Caribbean rhythmic sensibilities. As Jimmy moved into his second song, You Can Get It If You Really Want, something unexpected happened that would transform the evening from a simple cross-cultural musical presentation into a legendary moment in folk and reggae history. A figure emerged from the backstage area carrying a battered acoustic guitar and wearing clothes that made him almost invisible among the festival crew and musicians who typically moved around the performance area during sets. He was slight, with wild curly hair partially hidden under a worn cap, and he moved with the confidence of someone who belonged on any stage in America. The mysterious figure walked directly onto the stage while Jimmy was mid-song, an action that should have triggered immediate intervention from festival security. Instead, something about his presence suggested that he had every right to be there, and the security personnel hesitated, rather than removing what appeared to be an intruder. Jimmy noticed the guitarist's approach, and showing the professional grace that had made him respected in music circles worldwide, continued performing while keeping an eye on this unexpected visitor, who was now standing just a few feet away. When Jimmy finished, You Can Get It If You Really Want, the mysterious guitarist stepped forward and spoke in a nasal, distinctive voice that some audience members thought they recognized, but couldn't quite place. "That's real nice, man," the stranger said, his voice carrying across the festival's sound system. "You got something there with that rhythm and that message. But I'm wondering if you can handle a little musical conversation." Jimmy looked at this scruffy, confident musician who had appeared uninvited on his stage and was now proposing some kind of musical collaboration or challenge. In any other setting, this might have been an insult or a disruption. But at Newport Folk Festival, spontaneous musical interactions were part of the tradition that made the event special. "What kind of conversation did you have in mind?" Jimmy asked, his Jamaican accent creating an interesting contrast with the stranger's distinctly American voice. The mysterious guitarist strummed a few chords that immediately demonstrated his serious musical abilities. "How about we see what happens when Caribbean protest music meets American folk wisdom? I'll play something, You respond with your style, and we'll find out if music really is a universal language." The audience was intrigued by this unexpected development. This wasn't part of the scheduled program, but Newport Folk Festival had a reputation for magical, spontaneous moments, and people sensed that something special might be happening. Jimmy smiled and nodded, understanding that he was being invited into the kind of musical dialogue that could either create magic or expose his limitations in front of 17,000 folk music experts. "I'm ready for any conversation you want to have." The mysterious guitarist launched into a complex finger-picking pattern that was immediately recognizable as sophisticated American folk guitar work, but played with an intensity and political edge that suggested this wasn't just any folk musician. His playing demonstrated technical mastery, combined with the kind of emotional authenticity that made folk music a vehicle for social change. As the stranger played, Jimmy listened intently, understanding that he was being challenged not just technically, but philosophically. This was a musical conversation about different approaches to protest music, different ways of expressing social consciousness, and different cultural perspectives on using music as a tool for awakening consciousness. When the mysterious guitarist finished his opening statement, Jimmy responded with a reggae-influenced interpretation of the same melodic ideas, transforming the American folk patterns into Caribbean rhythms, while maintaining the political urgency that had driven the original performance. The musical dialogue that followed was unlike anything that had ever happened at Newport Folk Festival. Two completely different approaches to protest music were being woven together in real time, creating something that was neither pure folk nor pure reggae, but a new synthesis that captured the best elements of both traditions. As the musical conversation continued, people in the audience began to realize that they weren't just watching an impromptu collaboration. They were witnessing the birth of a new musical possibility that could expand how protest music reached different communities and expressed universal struggles for justice and freedom. The mysterious guitarist's identity remained unclear to most of the audience, but his musical authority and the sophistication of his playing suggested that this wasn't some random festival attendee who had wandered onto the stage. This was clearly an established musician who was testing both his own boundaries and Jimmy's ability to engage in high-level musical dialogue. The breakthrough moment came when Jimmy began playing "The Harder They Come," his anthem about refusing to give up in the face of oppression. As he played the opening chords, the mysterious guitarist began weaving counter-melodies that enhanced rather than competed with Jimmy's message. What emerged was a version of "The Harder They Come" that incorporated American folk guitar techniques while maintaining its Caribbean spiritual power. The combination created something that spoke to universal experiences of resistance to oppression while honoring both musical traditions. As the collaborative performance reached its climax, the mysterious guitarist stepped closer to his microphone and began singing harmony vocals that complemented Jimmy's lead voice perfectly. His distinctive nasal tone, combined with lyrics that demonstrated intimate knowledge of both American protest music and Caribbean struggles for justice, created a sonic blend that was both surprising and inevitable. The audience was mesmerized by what they were hearing, but it wasn't until the mysterious guitarist sang a particular phrase, "The answer, my friend, is blowin' in the wind," woven into the fabric of "The Harder They Come," that recognition began spreading through the crowd like wildfire. People started pointing, whispering excitedly, and then gradually standing as they realized that the scruffy, unannounced collaborator who had transformed Jimmy's performance was none other than Bob Dylan, folk music's most revolutionary and influential voice. The recognition created an electric energy in the audience as people understood that they were witnessing not just an impromptu collaboration, but a historical moment where two different traditions of protest music were being united by two of their most authentic representatives. Dylan, finally identified, stepped forward and addressed the audience directly. "Ladies and gentlemen, tonight we've learned that protest music doesn't have boundaries and consciousness doesn't have nationality. Jimmy Cliff has shown me that Caribbean music carries the same spirit of resistance and hope that we've been trying to express through American folk music. Jimmy responded with equal graciousness, and Bob has shown me that musical traditions can enhance each other instead of competing. Tonight we've created something that neither of us could have made alone. What followed was a 45-minute collaborative set that became legendary in both folk and reggae history. The musical conversation between Dylan and Jimmy created moments of pure magic that no one in attendance would ever forget. They began with Dylan's "The Times They Are A-Changin'," but Jimmy transformed it into something entirely new by adding reggae's distinctive offbeat rhythm and Rastafarian spiritual perspectives on social transformation. Dylan's politically urgent lyrics took on new dimensions when filtered through Caribbean experiences of colonial oppression and spiritual awakening. The crowd was stunned by how naturally the two styles merged. Dylan's harmonica wailed over Jimmy's reggae guitar patterns, creating a sound that was neither folk nor reggae, but something completely original that captured the protest spirit of both traditions. When they performed Jimmy's "Sitting in Limbo," Dylan's folk guitar techniques and nasal vocal harmonies added layers of American civil rights struggle to the song's themes of being caught between places and searching for spiritual direction. The combination spoke to universal experiences of displacement and hope that resonated with everyone present. The most emotionally powerful moment came when they created an impromptu fusion of "We Shall Overcome" and Jimmy's "You Can Get It If You Really Want." Dylan's voice carrying the traditional civil rights anthem, while Jimmy provided reggae rhythm and Rastafarian spiritual affirmation, created a version that brought tears to thousands of eyes. People in the audience began swaying and singing along, understanding that they were participating in something unprecedented. Folk music purists who had never heard reggae found themselves moving to Caribbean rhythms, while the few reggae fans present were amazed by how American folk techniques enhanced their beloved musical tradition. The collaboration reached its climax when Dylan and Jimmy performed an extended version of "Blowin' in the Wind" that incorporated call and response vocals reminiscent of Jamaican sound system culture. Dylan would pose his famous questions about war and freedom, and Jimmy would respond with Rastafarian affirmations about Jah consciousness and spiritual liberation. "How many roads must a man walk down before you call him a man?" Dylan sang in his distinctive nasal tone. "Every road leads to Jah, every step brings consciousness," Jimmy responded with reggae rhythm and Caribbean spiritual wisdom. The musical dialogue continued for 20 minutes, with each verse building on the previous exchange and creating new meanings that neither song could achieve alone. The audience realized they were witnessing not just a performance, but a real-time creation of new musical and philosophical possibilities. Festival organizers backstage were frantically trying to decide whether to end the unscheduled collaboration or let it continue. The scheduled program was completely disrupted, but what was happening on stage was so obviously historic that stopping it would have been cultural vandalism. Pete Seeger, watching from the side of the stage, was seen wiping tears from his eyes as he understood that folk music was being expanded rather than threatened by this Caribbean influence. Joan Baez, scheduled to perform after Jimmy's set, told festival organizers that she would gladly wait all night to let this collaboration continue. The audience response was unprecedented in Newport Folk Festival history. People weren't just applauding performances, they were celebrating the birth of a new musical possibility that expanded their understanding of how protest music could reach different communities and express universal human struggles. Young musicians in the audience were taking mental notes about how different protest music traditions could enhance each other, rather than compete for attention. Record executives who had come to Newport to scout traditional folk talent were suddenly understanding that the future of protest music lay in cross-cultural collaboration rather than cultural isolation. The collaboration's influence extended beyond music into the realm of social activism. Civil rights workers in the audience realized that Caribbean perspectives on resistance to oppression could enhance American approaches to fighting racial injustice, while anti-war activists understood that Rastafarian spiritual philosophy offered powerful alternatives to purely political protest. As the evening drew to a close, Dylan and Jimmy performed one final song together, a version of A Hard Rain's A Gonna Fall that incorporated reggae's emphasis on spiritual preparation for social transformation. Dylan's apocalyptic imagery, combined with Jimmy's Rastafarian hope for eventual righteousness, created a vision of social change that was both urgent and spiritually grounded. The collaboration's most powerful moment came when Dylan and Jimmy performed a joint version of Blowin' in the Wind that incorporated reggae rhythms and Caribbean spiritual themes. The song's questions about war, freedom, and human dignity took on new dimensions when filtered through Jimmy's perspective on colonial oppression and Rastafarian consciousness. Similarly, when they performed Many Rivers to Cross with Dylan's folk guitar techniques and harmonica accompaniment, the song's themes of spiritual searching and perseverance spoke to American civil rights struggles in ways that pure folk or pure reggae performances couldn't achieve. The evening concluded with both artists acknowledging what they had learned from their unexpected musical conversation. Dylan spoke about how Caribbean music had expanded his understanding of rhythm's role in protest music, while Jimmy discussed how American folk traditions had deepened his appreciation for storytelling's power in consciousness-raising music. The impact of the Dylan-Jimmy Cliff collaboration was immediate and far-reaching. Within hours, word was spreading throughout the music industry about what had happened at Newport. Radio DJs called their stations to describe the unprecedented musical fusion they had witnessed. Rolling Stone magazine sent reporters to interview audience members who struggled to find words for what they had experienced. One folk enthusiast told the magazine, "I came to Newport thinking I knew what protest music sounded like. Tonight I learned that I had only heard one dialect of a much larger language." Record executives began frantically arranging recording sessions to capture similar cross-cultural musical magic. Within weeks, folk musicians across America were seeking out reggae artists to collaborate with, while Caribbean musicians explored how American folk techniques could enhance their spiritual and political messages. The collaboration also had profound effects on the civil rights movement. Activists who attended Newport began incorporating Caribbean perspectives on resistance into their strategies for fighting American racial injustice. The Rastafarian emphasis on spiritual strength offered new approaches to sustaining hope during long struggles for social change. Bob Dylan's own career was transformed by his encounter with Jimmy Cliff's musical and spiritual approach. In subsequent interviews, Dylan credited the Newport collaboration with expanding his understanding of rhythm's role in protest music and deepening his appreciation for spirituality's place in social activism. "Jimmy taught me that protest music doesn't have to choose between political urgency and spiritual depth," Dylan reflected in a 1968 interview. "Caribbean music showed me how rhythm could carry revolutionary messages just as powerfully as words." Jimmy's career was equally enhanced by his collaboration with Dylan. The exposure to American folk music traditions deepened his understanding of narrative storytelling's power in consciousness-raising music, while his association with Dylan opened doors to mainstream American audiences previously inaccessible to Caribbean artists. "Bob showed me that American folk music and Caribbean protest music were fighting the same battles with different weapons," Jimmy said in a 1970 interview. "Our collaboration proved that musicians from different cultures could strengthen each other's messages." The Newport Soak Festival collaboration also influenced how both artists approached their subsequent work. Dylan began incorporating more rhythmic complexity into his protest songs, drawing on Caribbean musical techniques. His 1966 album Blonde on Blonde featured several tracks showing clear reggae influences in their rhythm sections and spiritual themes. Jimmy explored narrative storytelling techniques that enhanced his already powerful spiritual messages. His 1967 album Black Magic included several psalms using American folk ballad structures to tell stories of Caribbean spiritual awakening and resistance to oppression. The musical fusion that Dylan and Jimmy created at Newport became a template for other cross-cultural collaborations throughout the late 1960s and early 1970s. Folk musicians like Pete Seeger and Joan Baez began incorporating Caribbean rhythms into their protest music, while reggae artists like Bob Marley cited the Newport collaboration as inspiration for exploring how different protest music traditions could enhance each other. Music schools began offering courses in cross-cultural musical collaboration, understanding that the future of protest music lay in building bridges between different traditions rather than maintaining artificial boundaries. The Newport collaboration had demonstrated that authentic political and spiritual messages could be strengthened by cross-cultural musical dialogue. The recording of that evening's spontaneous collaboration was eventually released as Folk Meets Reggae, the Newport Tapes, in 1968, becoming one of the most influential cross-cultural recordings in popular music history, and inspiring countless musicians to explore how different protest traditions could enhance each other. The legacy of the mysterious guitarist who walked onto Jimmy Cliff's stage continues to influence musicians who understand that authentic protest music transcends cultural boundaries, and that the most powerful social change happens when different communities discover their common ground through shared artistic expression. If this incredible story of how spontaneous musical collaboration can break down cultural barriers and create new possibilities for protest music moved you, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell for more amazing tales of artists who prove that authentic expression transcends genre boundaries and cultural differences. Share this video with someone who believes that music's highest purpose is bringing different communities together around shared struggles for justice and freedom. Have you ever witnessed a spontaneous musical collaboration that changed your understanding of what music could be? Let us know in the comments below, and don't forget to check out our other videos about artists who used cross-cultural musical dialogue to expand the possibilities for consciousness-raising art.